My name is Kent. I'm one of the pastors here, and I do thank God for you. I'm so glad that you're here. I love Sundays, and I love that we're part of a congregation that gathers together and actually enjoys that. And we come with an expectation that God's going to do something. And maybe He's already started that in you, and thank God for that. We have been thinking about abiding with Jesus. That's been kind of our focus all year long, and we've been using 4 chairs to help us understand that this is a progression, and it starts with chair 1, where maybe somebody is still exploring Jesus or curious about Jesus. They haven't come to faith yet, but they're wanting to know more. And then there's a line of faith that we cross when we say, I trust in you, Jesus. Thank you for what you've done. We become a new believer, and we grow in that faith, and then we move to chair 3, where we're deepening that faith, maybe discovering that we have gifts to use to serve in the kingdom and be used by God. And then hopefully we keep growing to chair 4, where we become reproducers, we become leaders or disciple makers. So we're like investing in other people who are in the chairs leading up to this. We think that the spiritual practices help us grow wherever we're at, whatever chair you're in, they help us grow. We've talked about abiding in the Word and about prayer, about fasting. And a couple of weeks ago, we started talking about Sabbath keeping. What does it mean for us to practice Sabbath? So we're going to continue that today, and I'm going to be in Hebrews chapter 4. I'm using a completely different translation than normal today. It's the New Century Bible, not the New International Version. So I'm going to have them put the words on the screen here if you want to follow along. Hebrews 4, I'm going to start with just the first 2 verses, Hebrews 4, 1 and 2. Now, since God has left us the promise that we may enter His rest, let us be very careful so none of you will fail to enter. The good news was preached to us just as it was to them, but the teaching they heard did not help them because they heard it, but did not accept it with faith. So these verses are kind of a cautionary tale today that we've been talking about this Sabbath rest that is there, but not everybody enters into it. And we're going to use Hebrews chapter 4 to describe not just what that rest is more deeply, but also how we then enter into it. And I started this journey of Sabbath a couple of weeks ago by showing you images of rest. Remember sleeping animals, sleeping babies, and we've been talking a lot about, restful, peaceful ideas. Today I want to start with some different images that represent a metaphor for doing or for success, for striving, for achieving. I'm going to show you the image, and then I want you to see if you can guess what metaphor for success this image represents. Okay, so go ahead and look at this first one. What does that represent? An image of success. Anyone? Yeah, like climbing the ladder. I'm going to take it to the next level, move up another rung, something like that. Okay, what about this next image? Metaphor for success. Okay, yeah, I'm going to add more fuel to the fire. I'm going to, rocket fuel. I'm going to, up my game. And this is an image that a lot of people use when they're talking about, really being driven towards some kind of successful thing. Okay, how about this next image? Squeezing more juice out. Yeah, right. I'm going to give it all my effort, go the extra mile. I'm going to squeeze the life out of it, whatever. We use this image as something that says I'm going to keep striving, I'm driven, that kind of thing. Okay, one last image. What's this one? Yeah, okay, this is the consequence of being driven to climb the ladder or driven to add more fuel to the fire or driven to squeeze everything out of it. You get to run the hamster wheel. That's what you get to do. And I got to tell you, I often feel like the hamster in the middle of this picture. I've been running the hamster wheel, and I've done my best. I've done as much as I could, and finally I just can't keep up. And so I end up getting kind of tossed around, tumbled around in the thing. The book of Hebrews was written for people who are running the hamster wheel. That's why the book of Hebrews was written in the first place. It was written to people who are weary and worn out, and they were so worn out that they were looking for an escape. They maybe weren't sure that they could continue. They were in danger of giving up. That's what Hebrews was written for. And Hebrews chapter 4 in particular tells these weary people there is rest. And if you read the whole chapter of Hebrews chapter 4, you'll find the word rest used in 11 verses 8 times. So it's not difficult to pick up the theme of Hebrews chapter 4. It's about finding rest when running the hamster wheel. It is a little bit complicated passage, though, and I got to tell you, I'm greatly indebted to a sermon by Tim Keller that he preached 20 years ago, and I thought it really did a good job of simplifying this passage, and I thought it was still relevant today, so I just want to give credit to Tim Keller for some of the big ideas in today's message. He started his sermon in 2005 with this statement. He said this: "We live in a culture that's probably more in need of rest than any culture in history." Still true today? Yeah, I think it might be even more true today, that we are more weary, more worn out, and more in need of rest than ever. So what I want to do is suggest three responses to this truth, three responses to the truth that we are worn out. And the first response is we need to recognize that we have a need for deeper rest. I mean, we start with just naming this. Like, yeah, we're running a hamster wheel maybe, and we're tired and we need a break. This is what we're going to try to do today. So that's the first step in this process, recognizing this. The reason why we are in need of deeper rest is because we are the kind of people who are often driven. We spend a good share of our time like striving, and we actually take kind of a badge of honor from being busy, from being overworked, from being stretched thin. I'm guessing if I asked a number of you, how's it going, one of the things you might say right away is, I'm busy. And that's supposed to be like, okay, congratulations, you're busy, good job. Here's something to think about. Sabbath keeping is one of the 10 commandments. We've looked at that the last couple of weeks. We're commanded that in 6 days we're supposed to do all of our work, and on one day we're supposed to stop. That's the Sabbath commandment in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. And I want you to think about it this way. Have you ever thought about this? Overworking is on the same list as stealing, adultery, and murder. So encouraging someone to overwork is as bad as murder. Ever think about that? So living in the most driven society in history is probably a bad thing if we're overdoing it. And we know that the technology since 2005 has not helped us in this area, because now we live in a world that's actually made it easier for us to work all the time because technology follows us. So I can, check my work emails at home. I can go online and do some work. I want to see if I'm missing anything, if I'm getting behind or whatever. Technology follows us so that we don't even have to go to work to work. Work is there all the time. We have more access to our work, and our work has more access to us than ever before, and there's no escape from this. So this is one way that we've been driven. Another way that we're driven is that we have this challenge of trying to find our identity today that is maybe more complicated than in the past. In the past, a lot of times our identity could be derived from family or from community, from associations that we have outside of work. But now largely, identity is driven by our occupation. And that is driven by our achievements, by the things that we do. That's what gives us our identity. So that many people are driven to do this because their value and identity are earned by doing. That's it. And if that's the case, then we become driven. And I don't know if it's the money that it gives us the value or the identity, or if it's the social status or the standing that we earn by being employed in a certain thing, or even by the particular achievement that we have accomplished. But whatever the thing, our need for value and identity drives us, and it wears us out. It creates a kind of FOMO, fear of missing out. Like, have I done enough? Am I keeping up? Is there more I need to do? Do I need to earn something else? This is called drivenness, and it creates deep restlessness in us. And the first step in overcoming that is to recognize it's true, that we are driven people, that we're worn out, and we need rest. And not just a nap, we need deep rest. That's the first recognition. The second response is this: make every effort to enter deeper rest. Now, Hebrews 4 describes 4 different kinds of rest. I'll leave that to you to go read. But by the time we read these 4 different kinds of rest, we come to Hebrews 4, verse 11, which has this unique statement: let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest. Which, I don't know how that hits you. It hits me as odd, because we've been talking about it's peaceful, it's calm, it's take it easy, relax, do less, stop doing. And then it says, make every effort to enter this rest. It sounds more like do more. Do more. Make every effort. Here's the deal. That's not what it's saying. I'm going to use Pastor Steve's illustrations from last week to help us understand this, that this making every effort is actually about being diligent in pursuing a mindset or an attitude. And the first slide shows the kind of default attitude where most of us live most of the time. And this attitude is an attitude that puts me right smack in the middle, okay? Like it's up to me. And I think we got a diagram of that for you to look at. In this diagram, if it's up to me, that leads me to like, okay, I find my meaning here, I find my identity, I find my value, but it also leads me to be very anxious because I'm like, if it's up to me, have I done enough? And that leads me to being exhausted, which is the state that we live in. So if it's left up to us, we're faced with this particular dilemma. Steve contrasted this state of being with this next state of being where God is in the middle and we recognize it's up to God to do it. And if it's up to God, then what we have to do is we have to recognize my challenge is to trust in God. And I think I have a diagram of that also for you to look at. And I want to apologize for those people here who are very anal about getting everything correct. That worrying is missing a Y. And I'll admit, I did not notice that. Somebody else noticed that and pointed it out to me. I told them, it's not up to me, it's up to God to get the slides right. Here's the state we're trying to get to. And this is the state that Sabbath is trying to invite us into. It's trying to invite us into a state where we recognize it's God's job, not my job. It's up to Him. And so I can stop like doubting myself and doubting whether I've done enough, whether there's more to do. I can stop worrying about that, and I can stop doing. I can actually stop because it's up to God who's done it. And if you want to hear more about that, go back last week's sermon, excellent, and the week before that, a little more on that whole idea. Now, living out this second diagram, that it's up to God and I'm learning to trust God, so I stop doubting, stop worrying, and stop doing, is possible, and Hebrews 4 explains how we enter into this. This is what Tim Keller in his sermon called the ordeal of entering rest. This picture is the ordeal of entering rest, and Hebrews 4 explains how this happens. Listen to these verses. Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and attitudes of the heart. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him to whom we must give account. So far in our Sabbath discussion, we've talked about things that are like restful and relaxing and peaceful and calm. And now we get this sword that is so sharp that it cuts deeply. It cuts right down to the joint and marrow. Now this does not sound restful. I don't know how it hits you. It hit me as like a nightmare. This sounds like a challenge, right? What is going on here? The sword is penetrating way down to the place where it exposes our motives. It exposes the things that really drive us to do the things that we do. It exposes our discontent. It exposes our drivenness. It exposes our drive to do more. It exposes our attitude of enough is never enough. I have to do more and more. And we've lived so long believing that I have to do more that we often default to the first diagram instead of to this one where we say it's up to God and I can trust God. We actually become slaves to doing more, and this is facing the ordeal of surrender. We're facing the ordeal of surrender. The sword exposes us so that we feel stripped of these attitudes and desires that say it's up to me and I got to do more. We get stripped from that because the sword just penetrates right down to the bone, to the marrow. It cuts us to the bone. And the word in this passage for uncovered, it uncovers us or exposes us, is actually the word naked. So it's like what happens when we come to this realization that we are driven people? We stand exposed. We stand buck naked. If that isn't like a nightmare, I don't know what is, right? This is facing the ordeal. Sabbath invites us to surrender our dependence on all the things we do, surrender our it's up to me attitude, and say, I'm going to trust God. And if we're going to do that, then we have to start by saying, yeah, I'm guilty. I'm naked. I'm exposed. We surrender to complete trust in God, and that can be a real ordeal. And the real ordeal really is facing our spiritual nakedness. So what the writer of Hebrews is trying to get us to do, he's trying to get us to say, okay, work your way down these levels of rest to this final rest, which is resting in the gospel. And resting in the gospel recognizes that I have to get to a point where I say, you know what, I can do nothing to save myself. I'm absolutely dependent on God to save me. If I left to my own devices, I stand before God naked and exposed, and I face the realization I can never do enough. I can never be good enough. I need God's help. This is what this exposure does. Now, to try to understand just how this all ties together, go back to Genesis and the story of Adam and Eve. And you'll remember that Adam and Eve were in the garden that God created, and God said, I'm going to give you this whole garden. He's giving them all these good gifts. Everything that was there was theirs, except for this one tree. Don't go there. So they had all this blessing from God. And do you remember how they were standing in this blessing? The Bible actually describes Adam and Eve in their stature standing with these gifts. Anybody remember? They were naked and unashamed. Here they stand, naked, but there's no threat to them. They are completely comfortable with, they're absolutely satisfied with their identities. They absolutely know their value. They know who they are in God. They absolutely recognize that God has given them enough. He's given them everything they need. They're recognizing all this so that they were completely at rest. This was their stature. They didn't need to do more. They didn't need to add anything. They didn't need to strive. They trusted God. They were at rest. Until Genesis chapter 3. So we get one more chapter into the story, and it tells us this. They had a thought, and their thought was this. What if God hasn't given us enough? He said we couldn't have this tree. We can't eat that fruit. And that fruit looks pretty good. So maybe we could add something to what God has given us. Maybe we could do more. And they eat the fruit, and you know what the consequence was? As soon as they ate from the forbidden tree, what was the consequence? They recognized they were naked and they were ashamed. So some of the saddest verses, I think, in the whole Bible, God comes looking for them and they had to go hide. Hiding from the God who's seeking them. That's the consequence of being driven, of more, of never enough. This is where we find them in the Garden of Eden. And we are like that. Does anybody recognize yourself in any of this? I know I do. Now, I have a theory about this restlessness that comes from this, whether we're conscious of it or not. We're not always conscious of it, but I think we know at our deepest level that we can't add anything to God. We can't add anything to what He's done for us, to what He's given us. There's no way. We can never add more. And we know this, and yet we keep trying. And the consequence is restlessness and a deep weariness. We know we're never enough. And so we experience the same thing Adam and Eve experienced, a sense of inadequacy, a sense of I have to do more, I got to keep trying, I got to work harder. This is what I would call spiritual nakedness. This is a deep sense that I am trying to do a thing I cannot do, and I'm just going to keep trying to do it, hoping for a different outcome, but it's never enough. So we become slaves to our drivenness. We become slaves to more. We become slaves to never enough. That's the fruit of it, and it wears us out. So Hebrews 4 invites us to face this ordeal, to recognize this and to face the spiritual nakedness that we have. And that leads to the third response, and that third response is then to come to Jesus to find this rest. That there is a solution to this problem, and it's not from our doing more, from our trying harder, it's from Jesus. Jesus gives us deeper rest. What did God do when Adam and Eve attempted to cover up their nakedness? They put the fig leaves on. What did God do? God made clothes for them. He covered their nakedness. Once I faced the ordeal of my spiritual nakedness, of feeling like I'm not okay, and recognizing that I can't do anything to make myself okay, and I trust in God completely to do it, then you know what He does? He covers us. Robes of righteousness. That's what we get. And it comes from Jesus. Hebrews 4, verse 10, there remains a rest for the people of God. Anyone who enters God's rest also rests from his own work. We stop trying. We trust God. We put our trust in Jesus. No more adding to God's work. No more trying harder. No more slavery. And then Jesus says this, Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, Jesus says, I'll give you rest. I'll give you the thing you really need. And you can never get it for yourself. It's a gift from me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. There's so many fascinating words in here. So the uncovered word, the naked, the buck naked word is in here. It also says in that passage, everything will be uncovered, buck naked, and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. And the word here for laid bare is a fascinating word too. I'm going to give you the Greek for it. The Greek word is tracheolistemi. Tracheolistemi. What do you hear at the beginning of that word? Tracheolistemi. What do you hear? Trachea. Yeah, it's half of the word is the word trachea, right? The neck. This word had a very specialized usage in the Bible, and the word tracheolistemi was used when describing the making of sacrifices. And so when you make a sacrifice, the word literally means stretch your neck back. How do you make a sacrifice? Now, this verse is kind of a nightmare verse because it's saying this. Here's the kind of people we are. We are the kind of people who are spiritually naked. And no matter how hard we try, we can never do enough to be good enough. So we become, literally it says, we become throat slitters. Whose throat are we slitting? Our own. Francis Schaeffer, a number of years ago, he's a theologian, a number of years ago, he wrote an interesting essay about this scenario. What if you and I carried around a recording device our whole life? And the thing that was recorded on this device would be any time we made a judgment of somebody else, anytime we thought, oh, you ought to do this, or you ought to be like that, or you ought to behave better, anytime we had that kind of judgment, this recorded us. It wasn't recording the judgments we made that maybe came from, God's standards, or from the Ten Commandments, or from religious leader, philosophical leader. It's just the standards you set. And this little recording device would record every time you said you ought to. And then imagine that now you're facing judgment before God, and God says, okay, it's time for judgment, and here's how I'm going to judge you. I'm going to be fair. I'm not going to judge you by my standard or by the Ten Commandments or by any other standard. What I'm going to judge you by is your own standard, the standard you used against everybody else. And he hits play on your record device, and it plays every time you judge somebody else. And you know what Francis Schaeffer's conclusion was of this little scenario? We're all condemned. We're all doomed. We have all cut our own throat by the judgments we make of everybody else. But what if somebody would come and say, you can slit my throat instead. You don't have to pay for your sinfulness. Would that give you rest? This is the kind of rest that Hebrews 4 is inviting us to enter into. And all the practices that we're talking about related to Sabbath keeping are practices that are designed to help us get to the point where we can say, God, I trust in you for everything. Even my spiritual nakedness and my own throat slitting. God, I trust you to take care of that. And God says, I will. Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. When that happens, we get to experience the thing Steve introduced last week in Isaiah 26, verse 3, which says this, you, God, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. This is the outcome of that kind of surrender, that kind of Sabbath keeping, that kind of deeper rest. We recognize that perfect peace. And remember, the translation here is fascinating because really, literally it is, he will keep you in peace, peace. He'll keep you in shalom, shalom. This is where we go if we say, God, I trust in you to take care of all of this stuff. And Jesus says, I want you to enter that rest. So next step for some might be this. Listen, if you've never said, God, I trust in you, I know that you went to the cross for me, that you were hung on the cross naked for me, that your throat was slit for me. Today could be the day you could say that, God, I trust you. Jesus, I trust. Thank you for what you've done. I know that I deserve judgment for the very things I've judged other people. God, forgive me for that, and he will. And you could enter into this kind of perfect peace, this rest. If you've already done that, I invite you to a couple new, additional steps. First would be go back and read Hebrews 4, especially focus on verses 12 to 16. That last part of the chapter really explains how it's possible that Jesus accomplished all of this on our behalf and how that leads to the rest that was described in the first half of the book. So go spend some time sitting with Hebrews 4 today. It'd be awesome. And then while you're doing that, maybe journal about it. What is God saying to you? What is he prompting? A couple questions that might help you. What keeps me from perfect peace? What keeps you from peace? Or maybe what keeps me from deeper rest? Why can't I enter into that? Why am I still driven? What is it that's going on there? Those kind of questions could help you. And if you're brave and really want to go deeper into this, I definitely invite you to go listen to Tim Keller's sermon on the same topic. He goes verse by verse through Hebrews chapter 4, and it's a powerful message. I definitely recommend that. Jesus said, come, all who are weary, and find deeper rest, perfect peace. This is the deeper rest that God invites all of us to enter into when we keep the Sabbath. Lord God, giver of every good gift, thank you for the gift of this chance to gather together, for the opportunity to worship and celebrate who you are, and God, to reflect on the many gifts that you have given to us. God, I confess, we so often are the kind of people who are driven to more, to never enough, to never being satisfied. God, forgive us for that. Help us to enter into a deeper appreciation, a renewed appreciation of just how many good gifts you've given to us. And God, help us to be satisfied, to be content in that. God, be with those who are at a difficult spot in their life, that are facing unique challenges related to being restless. Meet them. Use us to meet them in that restlessness, God. Help us to trust you in every circumstance, always and forever, so that we don't have to be the kind of people who are anxious and worried and worn out. God, we are so grateful that we can come boldly right into your very presence, right into your very throne room because of what Christ did on our behalf. And we know that you are hearing these spoken prayers as well as unspoken prayers. And God, you're even aware of what's on our heart. That's what's in our deepest motivations. You know all that too. And so we bring that to you and ask you to do the good work that you do and to bring that work to completion. And we will be careful to thank you and praise you for all that. In Jesus' name, amen.